Welcome to episode 6 of the Slow Learner podcast. This week, me and Dr. Whissell invite our guest, Erica Ehm, to be on the show. She covers a lot of interesting material, offers a brand new perspective that we haven't really fully explored in the show, which is outside of comedy, as an entertainer, but as a VJ. We get to explore a lot of interesting new topics and introduce a new segment to our show. As always, we're a work in progress, so we'd love your feedback. We'd love to hear from you, what you liked, what you didn't. Email us at the slowlearnerpodcast@gmail.com or visit one of our many websites or social media and make a comment, like, love, listen, share. This is a passionate project, and we need your support to keep going. We're liking what we're doing. We hope you are too. So without further ado, let's join Erica Ehm for episode 6 of The Slow Learner. Let's just roll into this. Welcome to this, the 6th episode, Paul. 6.
Woo.
See that? That's
it's more than a whole hand.
Yeah.
The excitement's palpable.
This is getting to around the level my son can count. I'm super excited that we're about to max out there. Yeah.
Right? Episode 6 of The Slow Learner with our amazing guest. And this is a guest that brings sort of a different feel to the show. This is our first fully non-comedian, but amazing background. And somebody, as a Canadian, I think we can all sort of relate to because we grew up with them. Our guest is Erica Ehm, who I spent God knows how many years seeing on television, being introduced to my musical tastes and witnessing some of the best interviews of some of the icons that I shaped my life as a young person. And I'm just thrilled to have her on the show, and as a friend, somebody who I've gotten to know and gotten to respect and gotten to sort of be inspired by. So it's an absolute pleasure to have her on the show. Welcome, Erica. And I look forward to sort of like introducing some of the people that don't know your background here a little. So just to recap, you're a VJ for, I believe it was 10 years on MuchMusic, which is Canada's MTV. Was that your first branch into journalism, or was that like sort of a big break, if you don't mind me?
When I was 18, I had a show called Video, and that was even before there was something called MTV. So I was kind of on a path from a very young age. I was DJing in clubs, and I was kind of obsessed with music, but also communicating about music. And I was on a path at a very young age.
So you're passionate about music and you're passionate about communicating. Is that why you, like, I did a tiny background. So you did get a degree in communications, which I think is quite interesting. So you actually followed through on that path in finding a career where you got to sort of communicate your own love. That's kind of the dream, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I absolutely lived the dream. I still do in a different way, but I was certainly in sort of the mecca of Canadian culture for 13 years. I was 3 years behind the scenes and 10 years on camera. So it was a dream job, especially the years that I were there. It was really the genesis of MuchMusic. Canada, the world really had never had any kind of television like this before, or cultural hub that created a star system in a country like we did. So it was really, and it was fulfilling both in terms of having a great career, but also I was part of a community of musicians and storytellers and media people and journalists. So it was very fulfilling.
Did you know it was that incredibly iconically a period of our sort of collective history at that time? Or is it something that sort of you realized after it had already passed? I'm always interested in whether people are kind of living the moment of, oh my God, this is an iconic moment, or when you just go, oh my God, that was an iconic moment. Because I've had both in my life.
I always appreciated what I had, but I was also under an incredible amount of stress. Because what we didn't mention was that I was on TV usually 5 days a week, 4 hours live, no script, no director, no teleprompter. I was 23 years old, and the entire country watched me. And
Wow.
when I was on for those 4 hours, they would repeat that block 3 times. So it was an 8-hour block, repeated 3 times to make up the 24 hours of programming. So if I made a mistake or if some little bit that I did didn't work, I would have two more rolls of it. People would watch it twice. So it was a lot of pressure. And then when you suddenly are recognized, you go from being just like a normal kind of punk rocker to, oh my God, that's Erica M. I'm like, what? It's just me. So it was, I, I think I have PTSD, and that's actually not being funny.
Oh.
I was, I was living in a state of daily survival, to be honest. And so I loved my job, but in retrospect, it was very hard emotionally, on me.
That's. Okay, do you mind me just quickly asking? So, what was you? You would have been like almost a teenager when you started, like 19 or 20 in this
Well, when I
position.
first started to work in the office, so behind the scenes, there was no much music. There was only a show called The New Music, which was a fantastic 1 hour journalistic music show that was produced by City TV. So I went there to work answering the phones for City TV. And in the process, I became involved in the production, and I worked on camera at a local cable company. So just learning my craft while I was working full time at City. And then when Much Music went on air, I made a demo tape, and they eventually put me on air because they knew me. They knew who I genuinely was. I didn't, a demo tape is one thing, but they needed someone who they could trust to be a true fan and a communicator, live. And an audition tape can't tell you that, but they knew my character. So they eventually put me on.
That's interesting. The reason I brought up the age was because I wanted to again welcome our co-host Dr. Paul Whissell here.
I will have a
Uh,
question when there's a good
yeah,
time for me to come in here and attack, but I'm enjoying the story right now.
no, no, come on in.
Well,
Let's
yeah,
jump in
so
with
so
it.
two things. Like again, that really takes me back because that was you're commenting on them replaying the reels. Like in many houses of people I knew, it would just be Much Music just playing constantly, just nonstop. Like that was a thing people used to keep as ambient in their house. So you'd get to know these people like they were at your dining room table or whatever. So that's in a sense the enormous pressure I can put into better focus now. The other thing I was going to say is this idea of really loving something but finding it really stressful. I'm curious if you think there's sort of a finite timeline for careers like this where you're in the spotlight, sort of personality driven, enormous load. Like, do people tend to exit around the same time? Or is it very individual? Is there any trend to it at all? Because I hear a lot of people stepping back at some point, but I don't know if it's the same point.
I don't think that there is at least in the circle that I was in, most people stayed for a long time.
Oh, okay.
For me, I was just getting, yeah, City TV, Much Music at the time was a very unusual company. First of all, they hired people who were weird to be on camera. They hired the freaks, the weirdos, the geeks, the people who should never have been on national television if you were on global TV or CTV or CBC. Everybody was a broadcaster. You had to go through broadcast school. You had to be trained to look a certain way, to behave a certain way, to speak a certain way. And Moses Neimer was a genius. And he believed that people want to see themselves on TV. Duh. To me, that is such an obvious insight. But people are brainwashed to think a certain way. And I know that Pete and I talked a lot about that on our recent dog walk, how people are sheep and they're afraid to think out of the box. And so you just do what the people before you did. So hire the straight people, and it's safe. Moses was not safe. He wanted to shake things up. And so he hired people of color. He hired people with accents. He hired people in wheelchairs. He hired people who looked like me. I'm Jewish. I have a Semitic nose. I'm not your traditional broadcast beauty. And it shook things up. And it actually shook things up for the broadcast world because he kind of opened up this taboo. And now you'll see people of different ethnicities. Now, of course, when I started, it was 40 years ago. So I'm sure that mainstream media was slow to adapt, but as our North American world has become more multicultural, they're like, oh, we can't just have the white people on. That's kind of not very diversity or inclusive. Um, but Moses was the first. And
Hmm.
so that was where I grew up, which was just be you. Don't be like anybody else. Just be you. Don't write a script. Or, I could create my own bits, but nobody overlooked them. I didn't have to get clearance on anything. I never really knew what I'd be doing from minute to minute. It was genuinely live. And sometimes we'd go out on the street and we'd go out on Queen Street and I had my camera, people walked by, we were live. And it was interesting. Pete, you will probably appreciate this. Last year, or maybe it's 2 years ago now, there was a MuchMusic documentary that came out. Now, it hasn't come out mainstream yet because there's problems with the music clearance, I think. So Bell or Crave can't air it. But it did air. We did broadcast it in some theaters. And one of my best girlfriends went. My best girlfriend at the time, at while I was on Much, who today does a lot of improv. And she said to me, "Oh my God, I didn't realize you were doing improv." And I was like, "My God, you're right." Like, I didn't think about I was just introducing videos, but no, I was reacting to my environment with no script. I sort of had my in, I had my out. I knew how I wanted to start. I knew how I wanted to end, but I never knew really what was going to happen.
Did you have like
And yes,
any set rules like you develop an improv, like yes and don't block, sort of ideas like that you sort of crystallized as okay,
no, because
when I'm in.
I didn't realize I was doing
That's
improv. I was
Oh
so
just
man.
trying to
crazy. Oh
survive
my
for
gosh.
like 2.5 minutes. Like, it's about 2.5 minutes every 12 minutes. I was on camera. But that skill has served me well. So for example, on this podcast, if your mics went down and only mine was on, I could talk the whole
We
time.
should try that out.
Yeah,
I
I
don't
think
think I
people
have
might
a lot.
prefer that.
So shut my mic off first, because I seem to have less value to say, and then we'll see.
Oh,
No,
see,
no,
hey, I am
no,
calling
wait,
you out
wait,
on that.
sorry.
I'm going to call you out on that.
Positive affirmations
Oh,
only.
yeah,
No, but
yes.
so I like the idea that to an extent this is trainable. I also do think there's got to be a personality element to this. Like certain people not only are good at this, but thrive when they're doing it in the moment. Like they don't need stuff.
Mhm.
I remember someone within my larger social circle. This is a bizarre reference that no one out there is going to get, but I think they dated one of the YouTube, not YouTube, sorry. Okay, I'm mixing things. YTV VJs or whatever for a while.
Mhm.
And apparently there were no scripts, nothing was planned. They just gave you time in front of the camera. So they're literally making up shows or bits on the spot. I'm like, that's crazy. But I think it's a
Mm.
certain type of person who can do that and enjoy it rather than just, survive it as well.
I
Well,
think there's
part of
also.
why I was able to do it, or what lights me up, is connecting. I'm a deep connector. Again, Pete knows because we walk and talk. I really love to connect. I don't like small talk. I like to share information that I find really useful. I want to present it in an interesting way. And my job on Much, which was very different again than any broadcaster, was to talk directly into the camera. Now, aside from, like, I would say news anchors, but they're talking at you. They're not talking to you. My job was to look right into the lens and talk to you at home, which is why you felt you knew me.
That's really interesting because that branches into a little bit of our psychology here.
Mm.
There's you've touched on so many interesting topics. I don't know how to pull apart like where to start, but like the first one, I want to go back to where you were talking about Neimer bringing on people that looked like everybody else.
I
The
used
most
to get
nebulous
so,
compliment I've ever given.
but no, I'm going to tell you, I used to get hate mail all the time, people saying how ugly I was.
Really?
I did get a lot of marriage proposals from the gentlemen in the penitentiaries. But
Hmm.
other than that, it was a
Oh
lot of
my
hate mail.
God.
So my discomfort with being attractive in quotation marks uh, came through all of the negative that I got. Thank God I wasn't on social media
Yeah,
at the
because
time.
that's actually very typical today. Like people feel entitled to send something
Mhm.
nasty to somebody that they see, particularly if they're a woman.
Mhm.
It's absolutely
Oh my
awful.
God.
I don't get that mindset. I don't get where that comes from. Like if you have a private thought and it's unpleasant, it's free to keep it to yourself. Like why must it be shared? What's the benefit there?
Yeah.
It's just yeah, and that's the thing. Like if you look at these YouTube comments for any presenter, you only have to scroll two or three deep before you get something so nasty would never be said in person. Like it's not hard.
I think it's particularly terrible towards women,
Yeah, I agree with that very
without
strongly.
question. I think that there's a lot of problems with that, and I do think they stem back to sort of the psychology. When you think about it, this is the first generation, not generation, but first 100 years where fame existed. Like recognizability, where I mean, for the last 50,000 years, we only knew 150 people at most
Oh.
that we could recognize. Oh,
This
you
bit,
think
yeah,
you know
this
where I'm
is
going with
the
this,
in
right?
our tribes were only so large. It is kind of true in the sense like you would only have
But I'm
regular
not going there.
contact with that many people. Yeah. And now we can see people
Yeah.
on TV and we feel like they're in our social circle and, we can comment on them and so on.
Well, there's some interesting social psychology that starts with what's that? The guy that did the prison, not the prison experiment, the other one,
Milgram was the
uh,
shock
yeah,
experiment, the
Milgram,
famous one where they're zapping people. So just
right?
just to
So
explain,
Milgram did it.
I think
That
it's
was that
important we
was
tell
debunked.
people who this is. This is a very obscure detail. Otherwise, people famously refer to an experiment wherein they were interested in obedience and conformity. If you gave someone an instruction to shock another person under specific circumstances, would they do it? And the answer, according to the original study, which has been revisited a few times critically since, yes, they would shock someone else if an authority figure told them. So that's the person we're talking about, famous for that reason, among
Yeah,
others. Yeah.
that's what he's most well known for. But he did another study, which is called the Familiar Stranger, which is the sort of the impact of immediate altruism on people that you recognize regularly. And he did this based upon people he would see in New York all the time, and how crisis or a need or a situation or emergency would immediately affiliate you with them. And from that sort of idea, a new sort of study into social psychology, which is parasocial relationships, which is the study of sort of famous or distance, recognizable relationships of celebrity, fame, and stuff like that, evolved to see how these relationships and intimacy that are formed at a distance through recognizability and connection. And one of the big translators you just mentioned was this looking straight into the camera and creating a sense of confidentiality with the viewer, which is called accelerated intimacy.
Mhm.
And it rapidly builds connection with people. And at the time, and for like up until the social media age, this created unique situations of interaction between those that were highly recognized and the person they didn't, because the other side of it's not a familiar stranger. It's a one-way experience of there's a
Mhm.
deep emotional connection and a feeling of familiarity that can almost rival siblings, as they put in one study. The connection that people that have never met other people have with this familiar stranger who's the famous person. And it must be such a weird experience because it has a positive and a negative. It draws people in, it keeps them, it can inform them, it can make them feel validated and connected. But at the same point, if you ever come in contact with them, there's a elimination of boundaries. There's a sense of familiarity that they expect to be reciprocated to a certain degree, and it puts pressure on the person that
Oh my
experiences it.
God.
Well, in Canada, people are so respectful. So when
That's
I like being a Canadian celebrity is actually quite lovely. It's People are genuinely polite. Now, again, because I'm kind of like not a celebrity of the time today, and the people who may recognize me occasionally are of my generation. But back in the day, when people would come up to me, no one ever did anything like, Em, you're such a bitch. Like, I never got that. It was like, Erica Em, all right, cool, man, you're cool. Woo, much music. Woo. I didn't get, no one harassed me. The only harassment I'd get if I'd go into a bar is like, hey, Erica, Erica, you look great. Erica, you want a beer? That's all I got. That was the harassment that I got, which was people wanting to buy me alcohol in bars and like touch me in bars. It's like, get away. So I just didn't go to bars.
No.
But for the most part, being a Canadian celebrity was very lovely, and I would have no complaints. Even go to the restaurant every once in a while, someone will go, hey, excuse me, are you Eric M? I'd go, yeah. Oh my God, I love your show. I don't want to bother you. Can you sign my paper? Like there was no photographs at the time, right? We didn't have those cameras. So people would say, oh, would you mind signing this for my friend? But that's it. Like it was, I really can't complain about it. Now, people who are in the public eye, there is this entitlement now. I started my second act career when I became an entrepreneur and built a business. I just wanted to say hi and introduce myself. That was, we never had to be afraid to speak to people before. It's scary. And to add to the academic piece, I was actually part of a knowledge mobilization program with a woman named Dr. Christine Chambers. We met through Twitter and we started a program to help her disseminate information about pediatric pain to parents. And we used my marketing agency and my platform for moms. And we won all kinds of awards. She won all kinds of awards in it because we used social media as a means to mobilize information, health information that had never been done before. So it truly was not only our happy place, but it was an effective and meaningful way to connect to people and share um, validated information, authentic information. You can't do that
Yeah,
anymore because people will say conspiracy, conspiracy.
yeah.
And during when COVID hit and it became mandated for people to have vaccines, that was the tipping point. So that's what, 6 years ago now. And I watched the world change. I watched it because a girlfriend of mine works at the Institute for, not the NIH, but Canadian Institute for Health Research. And so I have sort of an insider view of the vaccine rollouts, and I was on the vaccine
Oh,
committee
wow.
in terms of communicate the national, yeah. So I was able to hear what was going on with the scientists and the information they were trying to share. And then I would see it be posted, and then I would watch this explosion of people saying, it's not true, you're lying to us. Even my husband at the time would say, well, I'm reading these things on Facebook. And I'd say, stop it right now. You're sounding crazy. Stop.
But that brings up sort of an interesting thing about the power of recognizability and fame and familiarity is the power that that imbues information that's provided from individuals that are like that. And a lot of the information was leveraged by people of high trust positions that started this division. They didn't give the equal credit to the science so much as they gave way too much credit to the skepticism or the
Yeah,
generation of their own
if I can
ideas.
jump on
Dr.
that
Paul.
piece, this is that cool? An interesting era to live in where we get most of our news from someone who doesn't work as a broadcaster or doesn't have journalism training. Often it's a podcaster or media personality. And we get a lot of our health advice from people like that. Like we're scrolling through and seeing videos on things we think we should try, workout routines and supplements and so on. Like what a strange age to live in where that's what we look up to and we say no reflexively to the other person, which is not to say they're always right. They're definitely not always right. The solution is like healthy skepticism, not outright rejection of this and total preference of, the alternative, I guess. Yeah.
But
It's almost like we're in the era of burning witches right now. And hopefully, every action has a reaction, and hopefully as more and more people die from the measles and people start to understand, because right now we're almost in the dark ages, we're going towards the dark ages, that someone will go, you know what, those doctors, they may have a point, because we do have a measles epidemic, and hey, 3 years ago there was no measles on the planet, so they may have a point. and then maybe the light will shine and they'll go back.
There's some interesting historical repetition that's taking place now
Mm,
too that we're not
yes.
being taught about. There was fears that have raised throughout history, like early on with electricity. Then with there was fears of electricity causing problems. There's fears of
Yeah, my
microwaves. There's
dad
fears of
actually, I
different
think
things
he may have been
at
one of the
different
last
points.
microwave skeptics. We weren't allowed to have one until like I was almost 20, and I was excited. We could always afford one. That was never the issue. He was just against them. Like he had to wear like a helmet when he approached one. I'm not joking. We thought this was hilarious. He made it himself too.
Remember cell phones? Like people were scared of the radiation from cell phones, which actually there is a little bit of truth to that. But again, the
Yeah,
representation
which
of
is
threat
funny because
versus,
now radiation
you
is
know,
the least scary aspect about a phone that we're talking about. It's like it's ruining kids' brains and so on. Like
right?
we don't
That's
even
such a
remember the
good point.
radiation part, and now we're having a discussion about phones and children part instead.
But there is something very funny about the idea that the content is more dangerous than the radiation
Mm.
at this point, and the
Mm.
way that it shapes us. I think that there is room to also sort of lay some heavy blame at the algorithm that shapes us. Because we're being shaped by the algorithm as much as anything else. And these conspiracy theories work really well with an algorithm that feeds off people being having their attention grabbed in the first 3 seconds and then fed to strangers
Oh,
that don't have an interest
100%.
in the topic you have. The Instagram, Facebook algorithm that they changed to recently is shaping. You can't be specific or an expert in any area unless you appeal to something very common to break through that sort of initial barrier of exposure. And that, what does that say about any type of information that you're getting from a medium, some of it which has to be by its definition dry to provide an accuracy, that it has to somehow
Yeah,
be
I
entertaining or
think the
grabbing first.
expectation that everything should entertain us, I think there's a problem with that. Like a lot of the stuff that is right is also boring and quite honestly not fun. Like in I don't know how we're going to get over that hurdle, but it is an important thing to accept. Like a lot of the things we should do, like good diet and exercise, those are objectively good, but they can be not fun as well.
Well, that
Edutainment. We are in the era of edutainment, and that's what TikTok is. It's like you mentioned, it's people who become experts because they know how to put together entertaining little 2-minute clips, and suddenly they're taking your jobs as professors. It's creepy because they don't have the actual knowledge, but they know how to tell the story and grab the attention and pull out a few salient facts.
this actually is a pretty good segue to sort of also explain that after you left being a VJ, you went into public relations, you did marketing, and then you also had. You mentioned your collaborations. I read that you received a recognition from the Canadian Governor General Award for a one of your sort of
That
charity activities.
so
That specific one, if I'm not
it was for the it's called the it doesn't have to hurt uh
right.
knowledge mobilization that I did with Dr. Christine Chambers with out of Dalhousie University. Yeah.
So you have a history of a vested interest in providing useful and public service information, as well as being an amazing interviewer. And so this has been a sort of a lifelong journey of communication being the key. And that's a shared passion of mine and Dr. Whissell's, is the communication of science and the communication of information. And you've done some iconic interviews and you've communicated some incredible sort of moments in your career. In particular, the standout, of course, for me is at least Nirvana with interviewing Kurt Cobain, who is my absolute
You
hero.
haven't even
Uh,
told me that. See,
Is that
you
right?
you get
I
him to
yeah.
didn't know
reveal
that.
secrets. I interviewed him for an hour. I got nothing. And in like 2 minutes, incidentally, all this is coming to the surface.
Yeah, when he died, my girlfriend and I at the time drove from Vancouver right to his house in Seattle, and just
Why
we
was
were
he your hero? What
Um,
was it about him that really impacted or connected with you?
honestly, it was a transition away from what I it didn't connect with me musically. I didn't feel any sort of alignment with the music at the time. Uh, it felt too polished and presented. It was a lot of glam rock, a lot of like, stadium rock, and it was, it was so. But these guys were like me, and like what you were talking about, like Noah's and I put people on television. When I looked at Nirvana, they looked like me. They dressed like me. They talked like me. I'm from the Pacific Northwest. They're wearing flannel, then like to everything, like they had the same frustrations, the disdain, the sort of apathy. That apathy was everything when I was like, it captured sort of this sense that the world had gotten too big for us and we didn't know how to manipulate or be a part of it because it was too much to hold on to. So we just sort of like stepped back and were apathetic about it. And their music captured all of these things. And the funniest thing is I remember the first time I ever heard them because it was in a cab in Vancouver where the cab driver goes, "Hey, have you heard this song?" And I'm like, "No." And he's like, "Oh, hey, let me turn the meter off." And he pulled over. He goes, "You got to hear this." And we listened to them on the side of the road. And I'm like, "This is incredible." Like such a strange introduction to it. But yeah, so and I don't like using the word heroes, but I admired a lot about them. I also admired the way that he pushed back on a lot of things that were ahead of his time, like equality, this sort of he despised some aspects of like homophobia and different treatments of sort of marginalized individuals and welcomed that into that apathetic dome in sort of a more accepting term than that sort of narrow focused, glam rocky, beautiful, the only goal in life is women. And like this was a much wider arena of exploring sort of like our it was existential to a degree. Anyways, I might have over romanticized that, but you got to interview him face to face.
That is a great explanation because a lot of people say that to me, but they don't actually have an answer when I say why. Because when people say to me, this was my favorite interview, Kurt Cobain, I usually ask why. I'm known for that. Why? Why do you like it? Because it's easy to say something to me, but then I want to hear the reason behind your excitement or whatever. And I feel like what you just said really explained a lot, and it says a lot about you as well.
Well, yeah, the contextual sort of alignment, but asking why is it interesting me because it also makes people just sort of go, it makes them sort of question, am I just doing this for a cultural alignment that I don't know the reasoning for, or can I be honest about my own feelings about it? And my response was simply just sort of looking inside myself and thinking like how I felt about the entire thing and what it seemed like. I felt the same, and this is won't be as universally appealing a character. Time hasn't done what he said well, but Sam Kinison felt like that for me as well as a comedian. Of course, what he said, many of the things he said are quite offensive in the context of today, but the overwhelming sort of outsiderness and the anger, especially from a religious point of view, because I was raised overly religious, I saw this person breaking out and calling to task the fakeness
Didn't
of religion.
he, for a brief time, try and be a preacher or something like that? Yeah. That's
Yeah,
actually part of the
yeah.
backstory. It's really interesting. A number of, I think a
His
number
brother
of
Bill. Yeah.
musicians or comedians have a background that's intensely religious, and that's part of sort of their rebellion or whatever. I can name a few.
Jewish and Catholic. A lot. A lot. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off if you
Oh,
were going to
no,
name them.
no, I don't need any more lawsuits in the mail. I'm good. We can do this once the recording is off, but it's actually not an uncommon story. Like it's a very particular upbringing with a lot of rules, and there's often a marked rebellion from it.
So when you interview people and when you sort of like met iconically different people, did you have to manage your expectations or your own feelings for the service of the medium?
It's a hard one to answer with one straight answer, but I think the first thing that I would do is like I would do my research. So I always came and still come prepared to, just like you have for this interview, you've given it some thought and you have some key points that you were going to ask me, but you're also being very fluid and open and you're listening to what's going on and the conversation evolves. But you kind of have to have like a bit of a vision of the core topics that you want to talk about. But then a person walks in the room and you don't know who they are. They could be nicer than you thought, way more uh, open to having a conversation, getting emotional, or they could be real fuckers, like super fuckers, like, wow, you're a real fucker, like that kind of person. You never know who you're going to get. And even when you hear that someone is a super fucker, and then you meet them and you go, whoa, now that's what happened with Kurt Cobain. I assumed that Kurt Cobain was going to be a real bad guy, like a bad boy.
Hmm.
And when I interviewed Dave Grohl, he was. He
Really?
was kind of, you know, don't ask me what punk rock is. I don't know. And ironically, he's like such an interesting, nice guy. If you read his book, he's like, gotta love the guy. So I was when I was sent to Seattle to get the interview with the band. Yes, speak to the two background guys, but get Kurt. I was really nervous when I spoke to the other guys, and they were not all that kind. And then I met Kurt Cobain, and I started asking him questions, and I made it very personal. And I really tried to act as non-media as possible. So when he walked into the hotel room, because it's a media junket, and the way that works is each journalist is given a hotel room, and the artists are moved from room to room, and you're given 20 minutes, 30 minutes with the artist, and then it must be very mind-numbing for them because it's usually the same questions or version of the same questions coming at them. So I first thing he did when he walked into the hotel room, I was like, "Hi, I'm Erica. Do you want to do the interview in the bed or on the balcony?" And he went, "Oh." He looked at me like, "Who is this chick?" And I said, and he goes, "The balcony." And I was like, "Okay, let's do it." But I wanted him to know that I was kind of weird.
Hmm.
Like I would do an interview in a bed. Okay, so not mainstream because they don't like mainstream. And so we go out on the balcony, and the cameraman has the camera on his shoulder, and we're just moving. Like we're very fluid and very almost unprofessional on purpose for me anyway. And the questions that I asked him, I knew what I was going to ask him, but I asked him in like, so, like, what do you think about this? I didn't try and sound like a polished broadcaster. And I watched him relax. He looked me in the eye, and I looked him in the eye, and he saw me as a person.
Hmm.
And I said to him at one point, you're really nice. Like people say that you're like not, but you're really nice. He goes, and it's actually, it chokes me up when I see the interview because he goes, I'm a nice guy. I'm like, I know, but you don't really show it very often. And he goes, and that's where there's an edit. He kind of laughs nervously. But I asked him at like, why you talk a lot about how the world is so horrible. Why did you bring a baby into the world? Because he had just had a child. Like
Yes.
we had a conversation. And that's why that video or that interview is considered one of the best ever done with him and one of the best rock and roll interviews ever. And I did it on purpose. I diminished myself on purpose rather than like, hey, I'm Erica Ehm. I've been on TV for a decade and I'm really good at it. I've interviewed everybody. No, the opposite. I wanted him to feel like it was an intimate conversation where he was safe.
It's interesting. It's like a form of what's vital for academics too, an intellectual humility to sort of like be able to engage with the idea and the medium. You're doing like sort of like a journalistic or human humility. Like you're opening yourself up, you're lowering status so that he
Yeah,
can
you
be
want to be
human
able to
in
resonate
response.
with someone. If you come across as immediately, I'm better than you, here's like, okay, there are certain settings that have authority figures. I don't think an interview is supposed to be one of them. Yeah. Or a comic performance. Academics is different though, because sometimes it depends on the forum. So if they're giving a lecture, they kind of like being perceived as in charge, like, or having authority in that sense. But if you're talking to them or they're, in a more informal setting, the rules are obviously very different. But I think it takes a skill to do that convincingly, because like if someone like to identify with someone or just seem normal or to you don't want to make it seem intentional, like they think you're diminishing yourself, that sort of thing. They can't be conscious of it, I guess.
Well, here's why I couldn't answer the question completely because when Kiss came to the studio, I was like, all right, sit down. I'm in control. Here's the questions. and they would start to, fuck around. I'd go, actually, no. And I was the opposite. I was like dominatrix. And I
That's
have a quote from Paul Stanley. He goes, "Whoa, you're friendly yet authoritative." This was in the middle of the
That's
interview
good.
because he
That's
was
good.
he was kind of surprised because I'm kind of cute and I look young and I'm friendly, but do not fuck with me. And the interviews, and I knew that whenever you get like a bunch of hair bands in there and they start jostling their buddies and they're like they all start they want to be bad boys, and I'm like, please don't fuck with me. Like, don't do it. I've been it so many times. It's the same thing. It's so boring. And so if you, like an academic, I guess, like a teacher, you walk in and you go, all right, I'm in control here. Look me in the eye. We can have some fun, but it's on my terms, not yours. And I think they kind of feel safe because they know, first of all, I can handle it. They can
Hmm.
get a little rowdy, but I can
So I
control
guess a key step early on is
that's a
reading which of, well, not like there's just two, but you have to be kind of attuned
absolutely.
to that. It-
No, you have
yeah.
to read. So that's what I was going to say is I think my skill is reading people in the moment. So you do your research and you have the core of what you're going to talk about, but then when you walk in the room, you you just have to be intuitive and empathetic and feel the person and match their energy in what is required.
I think that that's an interesting thing about interviewing effectively too, is that it's like you're talking about escalating your status at certain places and elevating in others. And this is very similar to breaking the ice with a joke or putting somebody at ease. These are all, and this is why humor is such an important interpersonal experience. People think it's like a person delivering it. Half of comedy is listening. It's always been listening. Because if you're not listening to how to evolve your comedy, how to shape, how it's being responded to, is it causing somebody to pull back? Are they leaning into it? These are all things that sort of affect the next step in sort of maintaining a humorous interaction with people. And it sounds very similar to interviewing, but people don't realize that
Interviewing
you're
is
interviewing.
all about listening.
Yeah,
If you're
yeah.
not listening, see, this is why you guys are doing like I think what will become a very successful podcast because
Yes.
you are you're communicating, but you're so comfortable that you're right in the pocket of listening. And so we're having a conversation and it's enjoyable to everybody. And I think the audience will also be leaning in because it's not forced. And by the way, when a host is anxious about asking the next question, let me get in there. I need to control the conversation. It's I think it's uncomfortable for the audience. But when someone listening is enjoying sort of the vibe of a conversation that you don't really know where it's going to go, but everybody is sort of invested and everybody is supporting each other. There's no kind of someone trying to talk over the other person, and everybody just wants to have a, a mutual learning, beneficial time. It's enjoyable to listen to, and I feel like this is what you're doing.
I hope so. I've never listened to it, so
You don't listen.
we'll
You edit these,
have to
don't you?
try. I'm kidding. It's a
No,
joke. It's a
everything you say
joke.
must
My
be
Oh, that was a
God.
technically
good one. I
accurate. All of
laughed.
it. All of it, right? Yeah.
Well, I
Yeah.
I
think
do.
that's your job.
Thank you.
Okay.
I do want to ask you, and this, I'm gonna. This isn't sort of thematically. I'm gonna push a sort of a, and if you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but I do want to bring it up because you were a young woman in a time of a very male dominated sort of male centric media environment. And there was also a lot of masculine characteristics to the themes of the culture at the time that were sort of dominating. And there wasn't adequate space being given to sort of feminine perspectives, feminine being, feminine presence. Being on an equal status with the male perspective at the time. And were you conscious of that in your position? Was that something evolved over time? And how did it, do you feel it shaped you, made you more hard, more resilient, or was it something that maybe enriched you even? I don't know. Like, I'd love to hear your experience in that sense because it is a unique sort of period of transition for our culture that you were kind of right in the middle of, from old
Yeah.
school men to kind of more progressive perspective, and you were kind of in that sort of sweep.
I definitely uh, put on armor, which I had a very hard time taking off. I probably still have it.
Hmm.
Uh, I am quick to, if not say, at least give someone the look or act like, do not fuck with me.
Hmm.
Do not fuck with me. And it's like that. I'm telling you, I get angry even when I say it because I get treated like maybe the word is like a VJ. So someone who introduced videos without them understanding exactly what my job was and how I didn't, it wasn't the forum to talk about rocket science or knowledge mobilization. My job was to interview rock bands and play pop music. So to some degree, I was pigeonholed as like just a dumb girl. They made assumptions about me. Party girl, never partied. Drugs, never did drugs. All those kind of assumptions that one has when one looks at the career or the job that I had. So it certainly hardened me. I felt defensive a lot of the time because I knew what their assumptions were about me. At the same time, I was extraordinarily proud of being a woman with balls. So when I was on air, I could be comfortable wearing flirty clothing or playful playful looks because that's part of the job. I was in a visual medium. It wasn't radio, it was television. But at the same time, I delivered the goods.
Hmm.
And I will tell you that probably the best thing that happens to me now is when I go to a conference, I do a lot of speaking engagements. There is a lineup of women who say, I am here because of you. Like, really? Yes. And I said, well, why? My why question all the time. Well, you showed me that you can do it, that a woman can succeed, I watched you control those bands. I watched how you were able to be attractive yet taken seriously. I watched your career evolve. I watched how you reinvented yourself. I watched how you took motherhood and turned it into a business. Women are watching, and I feel a very strong responsibility to be a role model, and because there aren't many. In fact, in what year was it? In 1994, when I was leaving MuchMusic, I wrote a book called She Should Talk:
Hmm.
Conversations with Exceptional Young Women About Love, Career, and Success, something like that. And I had to find 10 Canadian young female role models, and it wasn't easy. So I didn't want to talk about someone from the US. I wanted to talk about designers in Canada, a jet fighter pilot in Canada, a female stunt woman, all Canadian, and a doctor with Doctors Without Borders. But that's what I want to do is I want to remind women that there are so many fantastic women doing incredible things, and we have to support each other. It's like women support women because men are often intimidated by women, more so these days.
It's, I think you said so much there to unpack, but I'm like that you're conscious of the idea that you're a representative, because even though like there might be some sort of like we've discussed the way you were sort of reduced in sort of speech and classification from the masculine gaze, the male gaze, to an object of beauty or whatever.
Oh
But
yeah, I was objectified. This is how people talk about me. Erica M. Oh man, I'd like to fuck her. Oh
yeah,
yeah, she was hot. Like, there's a little bit more to me than just being fucked.
absolutely. But you stumbled on something that's such a poignant and reactionary perspective to hold, and that is legitimate. I'm so happy to hear you say, though, the other side of that you were also uh, a representative to women, a representative to girls, to young girls. Think of the thousands of young girls that got to see you on television going, oh, I can do that, I can do this. You that sort of power of, and that's something that's mentioned in the research too, of parasocial relationships. And that's the positive side of these sort of things that are, I didn't even understand until I sort of started reading through these papers, is that the incredible connection that's made through the same gender representations is that shows archetypes, that breaks down barriers, that allows the power
Oh
to
no,
sort of
I
move
was
forward.
just gonna
Sorry,
say,
Dr.
like,
Paul,
I totally
I
agree. It
feel
was a
that.
very strong example at a time where there were not a lot of them. Like as soon as you mentioned I had to find like 10 other people or whatever number, I was mentally searching my own mind, being around at that time, what 10 people you'd ask. I'm like, oh my God, I couldn't
Yeah.
name 10 easily. And that kind of was really put things into focus, how invisible some important contributors were. Well, I was going to say, like, that's the thing several shows have done over, like, this is always the comment about, like, oh gosh, dating myself here, original series Star Trek and so on. This was like the whole idea, let's show different people. This was the idea in the first one. And people see the newer ones today that is doing
Mm-hmm.
the exact same thing. And they're like, well, it's never used to be like this. I'm like, no, that was always the point. That was always what it was for. And for this reason. And I think, like, the Uhura character, for example, got that kind of reaction. It's like, oh, and there was a lot of excitement about that. So I do think that's great. And I certainly hope there's way more than 10 we could do now. Like, yeah.
Oh yeah, right. But it is kind of weird as a male to think back how normal we thought that sort of narrowed media perspective was, and that the transition, that change now, it's like, how did we not notice? How did we not see? How did we not give it that sort of thing? And in retrospect, I always think to now, like, we're going to look back at this time.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that
I,
we're not taking into account, that we're going to go, what the
if
hell
I
were we
can, this
thinking?
is this is one
You
of the
know?
things that I do think is important. You can look at the world as it is and say we can do better. But the judgment that comes with that, the harshness, I think is the part we could sort of do away from, in the sense of we're not done, and someone like you point out is going to look back at us and we'd want them to be accepting and at least acknowledge we did our best. So for me, it's like whenever I look at something like, okay, that's not cool, let's not do that again, but I try and understand how they got to that wrong point. And yeah, I'm scared to think what people are going to do 20 years later when they watch this show. They'll be like, "What was that guy thinking? What did I get wrong?" Because you don't know how things are going to change until you're all the way there.
I think be authentic to the time and yourself, and then sort of own it in the future. One other
People are going to
question.
think like, why was she so angry?
So many
I
expletives,
bet they
and none of
won't.
them were clipped. That was good.
One last thing that I really want to mention is that when you transitioned into sort of a branching out in your career into different things, you really you took a hold of the mommy, the being a mother, being parenting and raising kids as sort of like a next step, which again sort of like took this sort of voice of moms who were shut away at the time and not kept in the main of the media, and brought them front and center in your own sort of communication and media and marketing work. And like, you have kids of your own, your experience, what do you tell your kids? Like, what's the lesson that you sort of want to imbue with your children, that you've gone through being who you are, like, that you sort of want to hammer home? Like, what do you see as a positive and a negative? Like, do you tell them do this and warn them against that, or is there some aspect to that that's really sort of stands out, or do you just let them run and make their own decisions, have faith in them?
Okay.
I don't have
First of
kids.
all,
I don't know. I could be
okay,
talking out
I,
my butt.
I have to tell you, let me just tell you a funny story that I think you'll appreciate why I got into sort of building this online platform for moms. So I had had my son. I was like 6 months postpartum, and I squeezed into a little black dress. It was very tight on me because when you have kids, you put on tons of weight. And my ex-husband and I went to a party. And, it's like being released from jail. So we went to this party, cocktail party, and some guy there was chatting with me, and he said, "Oh, what's your name and what do you do?" and blah blah blah. And I said, "Well, I'm a new mom. I'm staying home with my son and blah blah blah." And he looks at me and he does that Hollywood thing like, oh, sorry, I've just got to
Oh,
talk to someone over there. And I realized, oh, I'm a mother, so I'm boring and invisible. What he forgot to ask was, "Oh, what did you do before you had kids?" I'm Erica frickin' M. I interviewed all the biggest stars in the world. I traveled around the world and I went to like Live Aid and I went to, oh, he missed it because I'm a mom. And that was the switch that made me realize that someone needs to speak up and remind women that they're more than someone's mom and that moms are women who are
Hmm.
raising children. We're not just moms. So that was my sort of feminist battle cry, if you will. And my website that was up for 18 years was very feminist. It was giving women permission to be more than somebody's mom and to not be invisible. And in the world of social media right now, moms have a lot of power.
Oh,
And
wow.
it
Do they
started
ever?
from my little, not just me, but I was one of the sort of founders of the mom social media movement saying, we don't like that brand. You're going to answer to us publicly now. So it's interesting. And in terms of what I want my kids to take away, all I can say is my poor kids. Um, they're they have like an earnest mom who like does speaking engagements about empowerment and using the media wisely and that kind of stuff. So they're kind of sick of my earnest lectures, etc. And the funniest story was my daughter and I went to vacation in Mexico, and the guy who picked us up and I start talking. My daughter's in the front seat, I'm in the back. He starts talking about things. I ask him a bunch of questions, and then I say, "Oh, you should consider A, B, C, D." I start talking to him. My daughter turns around and says, "Mom, are you literally going to give him a TED talk in the car after we just landed in Mexico?" And I laughed so hard because I went, "You got me. That's it. I'm earnest. I'm always trying to inspire people and see if they could think differently, give them
I think
courage."
that's
That
absolutely
authenticity that you
wonderful. I was
developed
going to say,
early
I don't
on
know if
is
Pete's told
there.
you this, but my wife Irene is the exact same way. She'll get to the heart of someone's life story and she has advice and she will share it. She had some advice for us earlier. But I actually think that's wonderful. Like just, getting right to the real stuff right away. Like I have no patience for any of the stuff on the top. And I also think, like to the bit earlier, like whenever I find out someone's a parent, that's when I sometimes, I hate to say, get most interested because parents always have crazy stories about what their kids do. And just overall, like to disregard anyone because you don't like their first answer, I also think is a problem. What was it? I can't remember if it was my mom who told me this, but her advice was always treat someone like they could one day be famous. If you can't be nice to them in the first place, just imagine that they have something wonderful to tell you if only you could get to it. So yeah, yeah, yeah.
Everybody has a great story. Everybody has stories. If you take a few minutes and like you said, Pete, humility is a lovely quality and curiosity. Those are, I think, the two authenticity, curiosity, and humility are probably things like if I were to put it on my gravestone, since we walk in the cemetery all the time, Pete, those would be, she was humble, she was curious.
Yeah,
That should have
I
been
think
on your
curiosity
list
is
of
an interesting one
questions.
because I
What's on the
definitely got that from my
gravestone
mom.
for all future guests? Make that even the first one as an opener.
That's
It's
actually
ultra
not a bad
dark and
idea.
it's
I think
very, I
about that
think,
all the time.
reflective of how they see themselves or what they want to leave to the world. Like mine is definitely going to be a Star Trek quote,
I always
100%.
wanted mine's going to be so that just happened, and that's it.
What's
So
yours?
I'm a
What's the
huge
Star Trek
fan
quote?
of Star Trek 2, and the one I have is like the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, and it's just reflective of an obnoxious philosophy I
Mm.
have that gets me into all kinds of
I
trouble.
thought that
Oh,
was Karl
it might
Marx.
be. Now I have to go check. Just a sec. You're going to see me maximizing.
I'm pretty sure
Well,
that's from the
it might
Communist
be. And now I
Manifesto.
need a new gravestone quote. You've ruined it for me. I had this plan for like 30 years, and now.
Karl Marx's gravestone was just down the street from me when I lived in Highgate
You
in
know
London,
where all the
and it was
best
like the most
graves are,
visited
Pete.
gravestone in London.
Seriously, what a
That's what
strange
they say about me.
collection
That's why I
of
keep a shovel in
knowledge.
my
Yeah.
bag. I absolutely have loved getting to know and learn your life story, and it's not even close to being finished. You have so many projects and so many exciting things going on, Erica. It's exciting. But you're here today for our first sort of new project.
The general idea is to ask somebody about a common concept or folk wisdom, and then see how psychology has explored that same idea. Because the answer that people have in our
Hmm.
culture is not always what psychology would tell us. So I actually have two questions, and they're related. And um, here we go. The
Ooh.
first is, do you have any belief about the point at which your brain is an adult brain and is done maturing? That's the first one. Any thoughts on that? Like, when do you think it's actually done? And the second one, which is related, and I'm curious if the answer is the same, at what age does a person really truly become mature or very close to their adult self?
I
Oh,
think about this a lot. I learned that technically the brain is supposed to be finished growing at 24, but that there is a new designation which the which I think it's called pre-adult now, which is for uh, people into their 20s until they're 29 now. World of psychology, I'm not really quite sure, is now designating them not adults until they're 29, partly because of COVID, because so many people's lives were impacted and the development was delayed, and partly because of
Yeah, yeah.
helicopter parenting, who haven't given young people the opportunity to weather tough times and build up the resilience and become adults and know how to do hard
That's a
stuff.
great answer.
wow. I didn't. She didn't know
Fantastic.
the
Yeah, yeah.
question,
Well,
and she
so
had
first
that
off,
much. That's
yeah,
amazing.
so a lot of people casually speak of the age the brain is done is at 25. But the more recent view is, you can say a lot of things in the brain are sort of peaking or turning around or changing around 25, but that it keeps changing throughout your life. Like, a lot of people feel they're wiser now than they ever have been. And 10 years ago, they're like, oh, I was such an idiot then. I'm waiting for that to stop. I want to look back on a time and say, I was pretty smart then. But a lot of other changes in the brain actually continues. So the 25 age is where most of it's done, but it just keeps going. And I think that's an important thing to emphasize is there's a lot of good stuff to come. To the second part, and that's actually the more complicated question, when are you done, truly being an adult? And there is a lot of research coming out, and it's interesting some of these cases where you do have mental health struggles of various kinds. There are certain therapies that are, I think the term is independence therapy. I might be getting that wrong. I'll have to double check. And the whole idea is facing a challenge and mastering it in that sense, because these days a lot is sort of taken care of us or offloaded. And I know there are certain psychologists that are speaking of, not enough play in childhood where you're supposed to screw around there and learn
Yeah.
and handle difficult. So a lot of this offloading has sort of backfired. Like, maybe some people argue, and I'm still looking at the data on this, but it's important to have the negative experiences early to learn from them, and then you get better at handling everything later. If you remove a negative experience, it backfires in the long run in the sense that everything hits you harder later. It's sort of counterintuitive, but yeah.
I want to get you back on topic, though, Dr. Whissell, because where is the research? Where is the neuroscience in the brain changes between that point of, like, I do know that the connections, the white
Well,
matter
it's a
connections,
difficult,
sort of
yeah, it's a difficult question to
finish
answer
pruning
as to
around.
when exactly every event occurs, because they all occur at different points. So certain parts of your brain that are like sensory parts develop extremely early, and other parts that are experience dependent, involved in like executive function, impulse control, social behavior, develop very, very late, contingent on those experiences. They're also affected by stress. And that's like prefrontal cortex is like the last thing that comes near the end. But as I said earlier, it keeps developing. So again, the 25 marker is always set as if it's like an absolute point. It's around then that prefrontal cortex
Mhm.
is mostly done on average, but people can be earlier, people can be later, and notably, I think it's actually girls and women tend to be earlier, to the surprise of no one. But you can continue developing past that point. But yeah, when you use the word maturity, you can mean it in so many senses. Like the brain value of maturity is different than the psychological value and is different than what we call sexual maturity. These are nowhere near each other in certain cases, which is crazy if you think about it.
There's some really interesting philosophy on
I
that
have
too,
not
which I
read
find interesting.
philosophy in
But we
preparation
are
for
getting
today.
to the end of the show. I know. I'm going to do a section on
Oh my
philosophy on
God.
this and put you in the corner at some point. What a great, this has been lovely. This is for first venture out of the safety of the comedian zone for myself.
Thank you. Thank you
I
so
really,
much.
thank you so much for being on our show, Erica. You've got so much going on too right now. I just want to plug the one thing that you're doing, and I don't know if it's okay, but you're going to be hosting the Canada Day celebration in London at Trafalgar Square. And I'm bringing this up because I went to the 2012 Canada Day celebration there, where I saw the Tragically Hip in Trafalgar Square with thousands of other Canadians. And it was one of my favorite experiences, especially since the Canadian Embassy is in this prime position right on the edge of Trafalgar Square. And it's just this really great event. So what an incredible, I'm jealous, and I'm so thrilled for you to get to do it, because it's a really fun, iconic thing to do. To be a Canadian in London at that time feels really good.
And the day before, I get to hang out with the High Commissioner, Ralph Goodall. So that will
Ooh,
be a nice experience as well. I get to, act like a politician,
well,
not just
you got to binge
Oh
watch The
my
Diplomat
God.
before that
Yeah,
and
we
find
we
some
just
spy
done.
we just
I've
finished
intrigue.
that.
already done it. Done.
It's so good.
Yeah.
And thank you again for coming on the show. We just loved it, and we look forward to seeing so much more of what you got in store for you. Dr. Whissell, thanks again, as always. Hey, happy Pride Month, everyone. This is going to be the fastest from shooting onto the air, because we both took vacations and we let our surplus drop. So these will be, turnaround's going to be fast. So happy Pride Month. And if you're in Toronto or wherever else you are, celebrate a little love and tolerance out there. And if you enjoyed the show, if you have any comments, like as always, please make a comment or email us at the slowlearnerpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you.